Hello and welcome back, and if you've been following home labbing for the better part of 6 to 12 months, chances are you are pretty familiar with this device. This is the Umbrel Pro from Umbrel, unsurprisingly, and it is making bold promises to simplify your home labbing setup, finding itself somewhere between a local AI and containerized appliance and a network attached storage device. It's an incredibly intriguing proposition, but it's more than that. The operating system, Umbrel OS, available right now for free and downloading and hosting on your own hardware, arrives with this, and it is one of many different operating systems in 2026 that are trying to simplify managing your data and managing your home lab. So this arriving at $699 is quite a costly proposition, although quite easy on the eye. And in today's video, we're going to talk about two things. The first part of this video, we're going to talk about this device. We're going to talk about the hardware, the value, what you're getting, what you're not getting. And in the second half of the video, we're going to talk about the software. So use the chapters along the bottom for which one applies to you. But do bear in mind that although we're going to evaluate this device based on the cost, bear in mind that the software you can get for free right now. Download and install it just like any other x86 or even ARM-based NAS operating system on your hardware, although we are very much going to focus on the x86 variation. But as mentioned, the Umbrel Pro arrives at $699. You can get it via kind of like a down quarterly payments or something, but again, it looks like you would buy it directly from them. That includes a software license, and it also includes the RAM, includes the OS SSD inside, but it doesn't arrive with any additional storage there. The $699 again does not include the storage, of which there are 4 M.2 NVMe bays there. Really love that magnetic base there. I do hope that stays on. Try that out. I will say this thing is a bloody fingerprint magnet, but not all of you are going to be waving this around on camera. It's only knobheads like me that are going to be doing that. So how much that whole fingerprint thing is going to be a problem, well, your own mileage will vary. But we have to address the elephant in the room there, because this device, although we can say it is turnkey, because it really is, you just plug the bloody thing in and it appears on the network. There's no KVM in, there's no keyboard and mouse crap you have to do. I have to say, at $699, normally I would say, well, it's a hardware and software proposition put together. But it's very hard to talk about that when the software is still readily available for free with your own hardware. So $699 on this, although yes, there's an element of turnkey to it, we have to evaluate that $699 for this hardware is a little tight. It arrives with an 8-core i3 processor, but it is the N305, an Alder Lake processor from Intel there. And we have seen that CPU before, because you can already get hardware with that profile. It also arrives with 16 gig of DDR5 memory. It's LPDDR5, so you can't upgrade it. But again, 16 gig is pretty good. Also, that OS eMMC module inside at 64 gig with the software pre-installed. The system also arrives alongside the 4 M.2 NVMe bays at Gen 3 x 2. So again, you're looking at 1.5 to 1.6 gigabytes per second up and down. For each of those, the system arrives with just a sole sultry 2.5 gig, a couple of 10 gig USBs, and an HDMI 2.1. Now, let's talk about that just a wee bit, because this is not designed primarily to be a NAS. So normally, I would really go in with both feet. The fact it's only got a single 2.5 gig, especially when there are options in the market with that same processor with dual 2.5 gig for your failover, and even options with that processor that have 10 gig there. We'll talk about these devices in just a wee moment. But this is meant to be about the central home lab, and the storage part of it, I'm not going to say second, but it's not designed to be an editing station. It's not designed for high performance external throughput there. At $699, I kind of wish it at least had a secondary, but it does have Wi-Fi there. It has Wi-Fi 6 wireless connectivity there, which isn't too shabby. And the 10 gig USBs, I'm kind of surprised there isn't one on the front. I know they're going for this incredible sleek look. And again, it's really robust, rugged all the way around. It's plastic there on the top, completely metal there on the base, with that acting as heat dissipation there with a thermal pad directly on the M.2 NVMe's inside there, fully magnetized as mentioned. And a fan running all the way through there, not too bad in terms of audible levels. And that base panel is genuine wood. You've probably heard about that in other videos as well. So design-wise, it is goddamn easy on the eye. And as a mini PC goes, it's a fraction smaller than some of the other offerings I'm seeing in the market with the same hardware profile. But if we break down that pricing, $699 there, I would say this is about $150 to maybe $170 more than if you tried to buy the same hardware. What do I mean by that? Well, if you shop around, you can get things like the P5 or the P6 from CWWK. See, this is a 4x M.2 NVMe mini PC. Although it seems smaller, it's actually a great deal taller. It's got 4 M.2 NVMe's. It doesn't have a portion of eMMC storage inside. It has got the 2.5 gig outputs there on the rear. But if you try to get the device with 16 gig of RAM and the 8-core i3 processor, be it the N305 or the N355, the Twin Lake variation, that price will go up. And it starts hitting around $565 to $599 there. So it really closes the gap on the pricing. And remember, this is the device without the software included and without a boot drive as well. It actually does include a 128 gig boot drive. Now, when you look at things like the Beelink ME Mini, which is a 6x M.2 NVMe running out with an M15 series processor and between 12 and 16 gig of RAM, that's a little bit more appealing there, around $329, going up to $469 there if you want to go for the slightly more spec'd up version. But again, that is a 4-core processor, 4-core, 4-thread. This device is arriving with an 8-core, 8-thread processor. So again, that $699 price is high, but it's not dramatically high. And when you break it down to build your own, where you're going to have to buy a PSU, buy your own RAM, buy all the bits and bobs if you really wanted to build from the ground up or wanted to add something like 10 gig, again, that price point there is actually not too shabby once you factor in the design. And also, again, this is not primarily a NAS, although deep down I'm going to treat it like that. Now, when the system was in operation, I'll say the footprint, the imprint on my network environment and my physical environment was bloody tiny, because that CPU not only is an 8-core with integrated graphics, but it also has as low as 9 watt TDP that can go up to 15 watt TDP when it's really pushed. And because the M.2 NVMe's on the base are only really going to be cranking at about 1 to 2 watts on the busiest of days, and remember it's Gen 3 times 2 lane speed because that processor only has 9 lanes to play with, the result was power consumption was mad low, sitting there just at the very low teens. And again, that's going to be great for those just looking at very cost-efficient home labbing. In terms of temperatures, when I had the system up and running for both an hour and then 24 hours later, the temperature around the top panel sat around 41 to 44 degrees. The SSD panel on the bottom, I will say, the heat of the SSDs themselves, I did use DRAM-less SSDs, unfortunately the only ones I had for my testing, sat around 55 to 56 degrees, but the base panel was crazy cool there and it was ventilating very well. And there's a little gap base around the edge for airflow as well. Now, during noise levels, again, very, very good. Even though it has an active fan inside there, it sat around 38 to 41 dBA. I do have a road just outside, so there's a little bit of ambient leak. But overall, the noise level, the power consumption, the thermals were all really, really impressive for this device, given that it has got 4 M.2 NVMe's there on the base. I probably would have liked, in terms of a NAS user, to see a slight scale up in the processor. You know, something like even an Alder Lake i5, the 1235U or something like that, and maybe 10 gig on the rear, but I think that would go into the power user category. Now, I do think there are going to be users on this that are going to be buying it for its AI capabilities, and we are going to talk about this more in the software section, but this is not powerful enough to host a particularly aggressive AI. And I would argue at its best, you're still going to need to funnel in either another hosted AI on the LAN, or you're going to have to use a remote API based, your Gemini, your Open API, any of the other options in the market, choose your own flavor. So if you're thinking about buying this device because of the AI capabilities, you're not going to reach peak capability on this unless you use those off-site assets, or at least off-system edge client network ones. It can run some things, some of which we'll talk on more in a follow-up video very, very soon, and some of it's covered in the software section, but still nonetheless, I think at its core, this is a containerized device for some of you that are looking for something with a little bit more charm, a little bit more easy on the eye design, and a little bit more finesse and ease of use, with no subscription than those that have already been reusing Mac Minis, reusing other devices, but of course scaling down the hardware. But let's talk a little bit more about Umbrel OS, because that, whether you like it or not, is making up some of the value proposition for the ease of its deployment. What can it do? What can't it do? Let's crack on and talk about Umbrel OS. I've spent the better part of 4 to 5 years, pretty much since the pandemic, when I saw a boom of people trying to self-host a lot of their own storage, to find a truly DIY, build your own user-friendly NAS software. Unraid, TrueNAS and more have always existed, but they have a huge learning curve in front of them. Now, a little while ago, I said that Zima OS was going to be pretty much the go-to on that. And now we're seeing things like FIGO roll into the scene as well. And with all of those in mind, although Umbrel is not trying to be a dedicated NAS appliance, I would argue this is a very, very close contender for a great DIY user-friendly bit of NAS software. It ticks a lot of the boxes. It has integrated file folder management there with file sharing. It has the ability to one-click install applications and services with some elements of tailoring going in, something I'll touch on later on. It has the ability to set up for direct network access there if you do go for the Umbrel dedicated device, or alternatively you go ahead and download it for free and just use the standard image creation tools like Rufus or Blanche Etcher and just put it onto a USB drive and install it on your own hardware. Also with the ability to install it on both ARM and x86 systems is hugely appealing. And this is something I think comes down to a lot of their roots, starting right the way back in 2020, this software, when it was a simple script for Raspberry Pi OS for Bitcoin nodes. And of course, when it got to 2024, then escalated into its own standalone Debian OS, which is kind of where we see the roots of what we're using here in its entirety. To put that into perspective, when you look at things like Hex OS, which rolled out towards the end for commercial availability at the end of 2024, there is still a larger feature set here. Yes, it is nowhere near as diverse in its features and functionality as a lot of NAS options out there, but a big part of that, and we're going to cut back around to it time and time again, is this software is not trying to be a dedicated NAS platform. It is about self-hosting of applications, self-hosting of AI, taking advantage of different agents locally and remotely, and we'll come back around to that as well later on. But on top of that, just generally ease of access. Now, where it does well is that simplicity in its responsiveness. When I'm browsing around a lot of the features and services, they are quick. And for a locally accessed device, that would be understandable. With remote access services, such as taking advantage of Tailscale and others, again, just visit the Application Center for more. But again, as mentioned, if you do want to go for the file folder manager, you have got that native facility built in. This reminds me of something like Drobo, which extends, by the way, to if you're looking at just configuring the storage. It keeps it simple, which may not be for everyone, but we look at something like this, which looks so Drobo it even hurts. This is built on ZFS. This is a RAID Z1. It's even got that failsafe feature there. It takes advantage of some of the ZFS features in the back end, like LZ4 compression and the end-to-end checksumming there for integrity checks, as well as auto trim. It doesn't take advantage of everything. I didn't see any native deduplication, compaction, compression, but I don't know how much of that is being handled there in the back end. Alongside that, when you are taking advantage of some of the features and services, some of it has been notably pared back. Some of it, I imagine, for simplicity. But for example, if you do want to take advantage of shares, it is pretty much exclusively taking advantage of Samba or SMB. And yes, there's a lot of hand-holding going on depending on how you wish to access it. But still, nonetheless, if you're looking at FTP, if you're looking at NFS, if you're looking at something like an iSCSI LUN, you're not going to get that here, for good or for bad. The same goes if you want to configure some of those apps and services that you're installing. Case in point. Now, say for example, you wanted to take advantage of this for multimedia. You look at Jellyfin there. When you install Jellyfin for the first time, it's a genuine one-click installation. I'll actually install another app just to show you just how seamless it is. Let's go for one there. What have I not installed yet? I've not installed their Bitcoin node. Why not? One click and it starts installing it. It's downloading it from a repo and it's putting it on like a container. Now, you may have noticed that I wasn't able to assign it to different directories or folders, and maybe that's not going to be a problem. but it will be a problem for something like multimedia, looking at something like Jellyfin. Now, what you can do is go into troubleshoot and then go into the command line, which I would argue immediately invalidates this software, because you don't want to utilize this device and this software and then have to go into the command line, because it's about holding your hand. And that's something I would argue something like Hex OS actually does pretty darn well. Let's go into, where's my Hex OS folder? There we go. I've got, for example, here, this is some old footage I've got from when I was doing my video, some B-roll, and a lot of the installation, some of the apps and features here actually has those tailored folders that I'd like to see when you install some of the apps and services. Hex OS I've been quite critical of recently, as development has seemingly slowed down just a little bit. Maybe they're taking 2 steps back to do 5 steps forward, but still nonetheless, one of the things I praised them for was when you installed their applications and services, some of their pre-made folder structure, again, predominantly for multimedia, I would argue, gets factored into curated apps and services. And that's something I want to see in future variations of this software when it arrives, at least for some, with that price tag there. The Umbrel OS, on the other hand, though, once it is all paired together, is really, really good. For example, here I am running Plex. Let's go for a test file here. Let's go in with Umbrel. Let's go into my 8K and 4K test files. Let's play one of the Jellyfish files here. I'm going to go for an H.264 for the hell of it. I should play it in original. And what we'll do is we'll get that converted down and see if it's going to take advantage of transcoding. So as we can see, and right away, bam, hardware transcoding being taken advantage of there. Again, we're not going to assess this too much on utilization, because although, of course, we are using their N305 variation of this device, you can install it on your own hardware if you so choose. But I noticed this in a video about a year ago, by the way. I believe it was Brad over at Radar's video. Again, I'm really sorry if I've got that wrong. When I first saw coverage of this device knocking around, and there was talk about whether you could access the transcoding engine. You definitely can in Plex, but when trying to do it in Jellyfin, again, it didn't seemingly immediately give me direct access to it. Now, maybe I'm using an older variation of this, but with transcoding now, I was able to attach Intel QuickSync. And it wasn't until I started playing around with the directories over command line that I was able to give Jellyfin their hardware transcoding access. Again, slightly undermining the appeal of this software when you shouldn't really have to dick around with command line. I'd also like to see just a couple more first-party applications alongside that curated app stuff. And I know pie-in-the-sky stuff, particularly for an app, again, that is available for free. But, you know, things like photography. Now, don't get me wrong, Image is a banger. Image is great. It's fantastic. But at one point, people are going to want to have some of these applications to be ready to go out of the box without using third-party alternatives. Because when you go down this road, you start to beg the question, well, if I'm already using third-party tools in home labbing, why am I not just doing that anyway? And that's true. So although it's great that these are installed really, really easily, after that, you have to start using kind of parallel configuration for setup there. And again, slightly undermining what exactly Umbrel is trying to be in this marketplace. And actually, a quick one on updates. I like that even though it is using a repo of containerized applications there, it does still stay on top of updates. So even though you're installing containerized applications there, one of the things you might find on different NAS deployments is you have to manually maintain the updates of apps and services there in certain repos. It's nice to know that they are still managing and integrating those individual application updates, even though things like Alarma are clearly third party there. So kudos to them. But you can't fault that simplicity, whether it is the simplicity of the information being presented to you, the simplicity of the configuration. I have never set up a NAS faster. And again, for a DIY build your own NAS software, if you are going to use it that way, it's got everything from Wi-Fi driver support there, and you can inject different drivers via containerization and using certain patches. Again, two-factor authentication integrated there, really easy out of the gate. Configuring the file services, although I don't like there's only one user. So although you can choose whether you want to configure individual folders or just the entire home folder network, you can do that. But I wish there was a way I could create a sub-user that could only have access to certain things, particularly when I start using services that may or may not have remote level access there. I would like to be able to create a sub-user for those apps and services. And as mentioned, you can take advantage of backups and synchronization with third party. So, for example, I have backup operations there happening there in the background over a USB, but if I wanted to, for example, attach a backup towards a NAS device there, I can do that. So if I go ahead and want to configure a new backup location, I can back it up onto another NAS on the local area network via SMB and rsync, or I can take advantage of a USB drive. There's another USB drive there attached. And then after that, a lot of the backup rules are all pretty straightforward. So if I go ahead and create that ruling there, you set an encryption password because all of the backups are managed with an encrypted protocol, which is great, and it means you lose the backup, you're absolutely fine, and you can set up exclusion rules. So you can say, for example, if you don't want to include certain files and folders from your backups, you can take advantage of that, as well as some of the apps and services where, let's be realistic, some of that information is going to be backing up is going to be largely useless and just chaff littering up the network. But once again, I do think there's going to be areas of contention. So for example, you can't really customize the schedule. At the moment, it just keeps data automatically backed up on an hourly basis, and it keeps them encrypted as well. And again, anything past a year old gets overwritten, which again, is for some going to be okay. But I couldn't really find any option, for example, to run backups in the other direction. So for example, if I connect a USB drive, yes, I can start managing the Umbrel backups towards that USB, but what if I'm regularly doing shoots and I just want to dump my footage onto this device regularly? Plenty of other NAS platforms allow me to just connect a USB drive or an SD card reader, and then the system detects that I've connected that drive, and then it creates a backup of that drive easily for me semi-autonomously. Two-way managed backups would be a lot more appealing. And yes, it's good to have a backup option, and it's great that it's that straightforward and simplistic, but I would have liked to have seen it done in either direction. Clearly, two-way backups are a thing within the Umbrel eco because you can back up to another Umbrel system there. So definitely data upflow and downflow is in consideration. Alongside that, the configuration of a soon-to-come private cloud to allow you to have end-to-end encrypted backups to their own cloud service. Again, no confirmation what I can see yet on where that data is going to be living. I'm assuming it's going to be some kind of AWS, something like that, but still, nonetheless, I'm interested to see just where that is going to be and how data flow is going to be managed. And hopefully, if they can add a two-way backup system, that'll be really desirable. And if you look below, if you already have an Umbrel post set up, for example, on a Raspberry Pi, you can manage migration here to allow you to migrate data between pre-existing Umbrel OSs onto in both directions on this system. It doesn't look like this is dedicated to Raspberry Pi, but it's going to be nice if we could see this as you move, for example, from this $699 Umbrel Pro onto something a touch more aggressive and more, powerful down the road. So hopefully this gets escalated in what its capabilities are too. Also, to their credit, the rewind feature is actually presented in one of the best ways I've ever seen versioning and snapshots ever portrayed. It's not new to them, and lots of brands have instituted ways in which you could roll back certain data sets, whether on a folder level or individual whole system image level. But I really like, for example, if we go for this one here, we're able to see all of these timelines that have been done automatically every single hour over the course of the last 12 to 18 hours. Now that's fairly standard, and as you can see, this is the current existing folder level where I can go in and just see the state of those folders. But I really like this timeline approach. So for example, if we go back to say 9:58 PM, not only can we see that version in a nice graphical fashion, but we can still break down into those individual folders, but natively we're doing it within the exact same file manager app that we've used previously. So for example, if we go all the way back to the beginning, at 1 o'clock in the afternoon there, we're able to see if there's any meaningful changes broken down by individual file types, perhaps if files are being accessed by editors or anything like that, or just simple backup operations that we want to reverse. It's all there, and then what we can do is just go ahead and select our version of what we want to restore. So for example, restoring the downloads folder, maybe we've deleted something that we want to revert, we can restore that, and that is on that individual folder. Now, again, as mentioned earlier on with the rewind feature, that can be set up within the feature settings, and then from there, the extent of which those backups can be maintained, whether it is that you're restoring here with an entire Umbrel backup from the back end there, or just individual folders can be configured in either direction. So It's quite nice that it has been laid out in that fashion with all those different filters. I just wish there was a great degree of control over just how much of those backups can be conducted on a schedule, because having them on an hourly basis, yes, it's built onto NFS and the impact of them has been diminished, much like you see on something like BTRFS. But I do think there are some users that maybe don't want this op happening every single hour, and perhaps having backup operations during off hours or a schedule that you can set during the night would be a little bit more preferable to some users. All this said, I wish there was more information on the immutability of some of these, because I'm not entirely certain if there is an immutability setting, or by default it is on. We've got encryption built in there. Now, what do I mean by immutability there? Yes, we can action these at any time, and we can view the history of them, just how many backups are being created there over time. And if we make our way back into the file manager there to look into the rewind feature, and again, let me highlight, I still absolutely love that this is a feature that is built into the file manager. Very, very intuitive. But when we do look at that history of backups, if we look at the same history from earlier, some of these folders, I don't want them to be overwritten in a year's time. Some of these, I would want that folder to never change. Say, me and my partner have a child. Those are genuinely irreplaceable photos. Photos from a wedding day, photos of, members of my family or past colleagues that have since passed. These are all photos that I never want overwritten. And the idea of them being potentially overwritten by newer generation images a year down the line that may have been edited accidentally, if not at the metadata level, then just inadvertently during utilizing them perhaps for someone's birthday or something like that, I would like immutability of some snapshots to be in place. Now again, maybe that is in place and it's just not being shown or dictated to me in a way that I completely understand, but still nonetheless, I do wish there was a little bit more flexibility there in terms of the backup ops. And I do think perhaps they could argue that although they are trying to keep things simple, I do think some of that configuration would come under the heading of novice friendly, just to allow for folders that you never want changed to be included there. Things like write once, read many as well, that some users, I do think it would be hard to articulate that, and perhaps this is an update for later. I do think some users would like to have a folder, call it business, call it work, call it untouchable, but a folder where it constitutes in the background write once, read many settings to ensure that that data can never be amended for a certain period of time. Again, I appreciate these are highfalutin ideals for a system that is trying to target novice users, but hopefully these are things that will be integrated into future updates. Also, for the more savvy, as mentioned, you can always just crack on with the terminal and start instituting some of your own commands there in the background to get stuff done. But again, I do think that kind of flies in the face of what you're trying to do on this. At the very least, it tailors it down into different apps and services. But I do think anyone that's looking at this and is admiring the simplicity, admiring the graphical fidelity, admiring the goddamn ease of use, because again, sod me sideways, this is an incredibly easy and slick and responsive NAS operating system. You have to know that much like moving from PC gaming onto console gaming, that arrives with compromise by design. It has to be streamlined, and by doing that, it's got to cut you off in what you can and cannot configure for it to maintain this sense of fluidity and smoothness. I'm not sure if the people at Umbrel will take the following statement as an enormous compliment or an insult, but Umbrel OS feels like what would happen if Apple decided to take NAS seriously. Not that passport hard drive with a LAN cable connected that did Time Machine and almost nothing else. If they really wanted to get into home lab and they really wanted to make an Apple equivalent of NAS and home labbing and local AI deployment, this is what it would look like. It is slick, it is smooth, it is responsive as hell, but it's also rigid, incredibly rigid there in the background. And whether it is you would want to have easy, simplified Plex media server management, whether it is that you want to have real easy photo management with all the bells and whistles of what the likes of Image has, this would be enjoyable as hell. If you want to deploy a localized AI and you want to be able to take advantage of AI agents or just simple LLM requests, whether it is you're bridging it with a third-party one, which is something I'm doing here, or building up to something a little bit more impressive with a locally deployed LLM. But I will say, building this on an N305 means that the abilities of an AI on this are going to be pretty, restrictive. pointing it towards an off-site LLM, yes, that would mean you can do a lot more, OpenAI, your Geminis and more, but then I do think it undermines what some people think of as home labbing if you're going to AI edge some of those services. But if you do that, there's loads that can be done. And locally deploying any kind of either on-system AI or externally bridged AI, again, whether you can use OpenAI, Gemini, whatever, this is, to me, for local AI deployment, what NAS is compared to TrueNAS and Unraid. I have never installed an AI quicker or easier than I did on this system. Notwithstanding that some of those default agents and some of the bridging mechanical tools like OpenClaw for agents, or Llama for hosting, or Hermes Agent for some of the more, responsive, communicative back and forth AI stuff, man alive, it was easy. And with so much hand holding, if what you're looking at right now for your first steps into home labbing is a software that will do a lot of the hand holding for local AI or local AI with remote AI LLM, I will say this is the easiest it's ever gonna be. It really, really is. And that, whether you're using some of the bigger boys or using some of the free stuff. Now, I'm actually holding off on this element for a very specific reason, and that is because I've been speaking with this brand with all of my feedback prior to them making this video. I tested it, they sent the device as talked about earlier, and I spent ages on it, and I wanted to give them my feedback, and I gave them a lot of the criticism that I covered in this video and more. Now, their response was that 90% of my criticisms and my highlights of things that are missing or not adjustable, such as additional users, such as some of the storage capabilities, such as some of the apps configurations, some of the tailored applications and services bridging themselves to some of the bells and whistles, 90% of my criticism, they said, is going to be addressed in an update coming midpoint towards the end of Q3 2026, and right now it's the 6th of August. So I wanted to make this video now for two reasons. I could have held off a couple of weeks, but I wanted to do this to, one, pin them to these are the failings, these are the weaknesses that I have found or at least observed from someone who wants a little bit more from their home lab, but secondly, because I'm more than happy to eat my words in a few weeks or a month whenever this software drops, this big update, to show development, show them making changes where it's not just me. You look online and you find other users have clearly said what they want to see done on this device. There is definitely an audience for this. There is definitely a home labber with less time in their life that is going to love a device like this. I'm not sure I'm that user, but I will say in terms of Umbrel OS, colour me intrigued, and if some of the updates that the brand seems to be talking about to me actually happen, I think we are going to talk about Umbrel OS a lot more on the channel. It does still have gaps that need to be filled. For example, this device with its HDMI output there on the rear is completely unusable. There wasn't really anything I can do, and although you can port it into some of the apps and services, the base level utility for it and running it like a theatre application from it wasn't something that seemingly can be done, at least at the time of recording this. On top of that, there's no mobile application, and you can't talk about a device that's designed for ease of use with or without focusing on the home lab community unless you're going to have a decent mobile app. And yes, you can run it in the web browser and it is capacitive and it looks great, and I'm sure I've put it there on screen. But still, I do think more client applications are going to be a big part of this deployment down the road. More proprietary applications. I know some of you don't like proprietary and you're going to run your own thing, your own image, your own tools. I get that. But for the simplicity and for those that want an on-ramp, easy onboarding onto the world of home labbing and getting their gear off the cloud, unfortunately, those apps are going to be centric to their buying decisions. Ultimately, I am not going to say this thing's too expensive or overpriced, because I don't believe it is. I think once you factor in the design, you factor in the ease of use and deployment, you factor in just how straightforward it is, I would class this next to some of the Zima devices from Icewhale in terms of their utility. And although, again, much like Zima, you can go ahead and download that, although they have added that $29 lifetime license now, which isn't that much. Umbrel OS, I'm willing to bet down the road, may well look into licensing because they're going to need to. But as long as they run parallel devices like this, they can then fund the operation. I think licensing costs are something that hopefully will be very far into the future. It's got plenty of, mileage behind them in terms of development, whether it is you're looking at Umbrel since 2020 or just Umbrel OS on Debian since 2024. I do think this is going to be a brand to watch. Again, this is not a NAS. This is a home lab solution with a plenty deal of NAS operating performance options built into the back end. I want to see Umbrel get more of ZFS on this. I want Umbrel to have a pro version of this, not just the non-pro version running on an arcade chip. I'm intrigued beyond measure about this device, and I would love to see Umbrel OS make it into my top 4 right now of NAS on-ramp platforms. Figo OS, Zima OS, Unraid, and hopefully if I go down the road, because true NAS for the enterprise and true NAS for the scale out will always be king. But for on-ramp, for those that aren't familiar with the world of NAS and are making their way from an old technology, a QNAP or whatever from Turnkey, that need a bit of hand-holding, it's platforms like these that have to continue to develop and really saturate that market as things get really, really expensive. And again, at $699, it's not going to be for everyone, but there is definitely an audience for something like this. Thank you so much for watching. There's a link below that you can get a hold of it yourself. It's the brand has supplied it. They've provided this device. They're not paying for this video. But if you, again, you want to check it out, it's linked below. There's going to be a written review on this shortly as well, so stay tuned for that. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to talking more about Umbrel in the very near future.